Well, you did your Zwift duathlon.
Yeah, Wednesday night, Zwift Duathlon. It's season 3 of the Zwift Duathlon. I'm telling you, it's a lot of fun.
Is it okay? So talk me through.
Yep,
So you're doing bike run. Oh,
yep.
okay,
So you do bike and you do it on a time trial bike on Zwift,
okay.
and it's 35 minutes. And the fun part about it is normally when you're on a Zwift race, you're like drafting people, and there's a lot of, on this, there's no drafting, but
Hmm.
everyone starts at the same time. So there's like 50 people all start at the same time, but there's no drafting. So you can actually
Okay,
see if someone's a couple seconds ahead of you. If you catch them, there's no advantage as far as like the draft, right? But
okay,
they're pacing you as you go.
okay.
So yeah, you ride for, well, it actually varies from week to week. So this week was 35-minute ride,
Hmm.
and you get 10-minute transition time.
Okay,
So in that 10 minutes, you actually have to turn basically your Zwift off,
okay.
then turn it on again, and then go into a run.
Mm.
So if some people have ran on Zwift before. And then this week was a 15-minute run, and you could do it on a treadmill or you could do it outside.
Okay,
You have like on a watch that has virtual run capabilities, which a lot of watches do.
hmm,
That'll connect to your phone, and then you actually have to carry your phone with you, and your phone's got to stay on, which is the tricky part. Um, or you could do it on a treadmill.
hmm.
I have a treadmill, so I did it on my treadmill. So
So wait a
15,
second. When you say the phone stays on,
yeah,
I can still listen to
get,
music.
you can.
Okay,
Yeah,
podcast.
you
I can
still
listen to podcast at the same
do a
time.
podcast at the same time.
Okay.
As long as the Zwift screen is on,
Yeah. Okay.
you're good to go.
Okay.
I recommend practicing running with your Zwift phone first. If
Okay.
you're going to do it outside, like practice that first, and
Yeah.
make sure you can do it. Yeah, so then you go 15-minute run, and then they tabulate the score. It's kind of an interesting way they do it. So they give you a score based off of I'm going to get this right. Basically, how far you go in meters on the bike,
Mm.
and it gives you like some nebulous score out of like,
Okay.
I think I got like 250 points
Okay.
for, I think it's actually 1 point for every, I don't even know, tenth of a kilometer. I think
Yeah.
that's what. And then so I went like 24 kilometers, and so I got like 240 points.
Okay.
And then when you run, it goes for every 10 meters gives you a point.
Hmm.
So I think I ran like 3.3 or something like that,
Okay.
3.1 or something. I can't remember, kilometers in the 15 minutes. And then you get a score, and it adds together, and then that's your score. And
Cool.
the cool thing with this one is there's multiple times you can do it during the day. So
Okay.
they're not the best for our time zone, to be honest with you. There's a 6 a.m. in our time
Hmm.
zone, which works for a lot of people. And then there's some in the middle of the day, and then I think the next one is there's one at 3 and one at 4 p.m. and then one at 7 p.m.
And you have to start at that time.
You have to start at that time, but it
Oh,
doesn't matter. You you're competing against everyone else for the day, so it doesn't matter if you did the 6 a.m. one or the 7 p.m. one. It doesn't matter.
okay. Okay.
And
Got
I like it because for me, it's really hard to get me to go pretty much all out for an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And we've talked about like our 80-20 training, and I'd like to do more intense stuff. I
Yeah.
fall into the 80 side a little bit more for me
Yeah.
personally.
Yeah.
Um, but so for example, this week my goal was like I was trying to really do 250 watts on the bike,
Okay.
and because I wanted to feel like 250 watts and then be able to run off of it and see how that felt. And I did 249, so I was really, I was
Nice.
happy, kind of
Yeah.
spot on with the wattage. And then I felt actually pretty decent on the run, because before last season I was doing like 270 and I was devastated on the run.
Okay.
So I'm trying to find, it's interesting, we're
Find that
talking about
sweet spot.
physiologic
Yeah.
response tonight we're talking about between swim and
Yeah.
run, but between bike and run. And I'm
Mhm.
trying to find like that sweet spot. Because like for me, like a 35-minute bike ride is pretty close to a sprint triathlon.
Yeah, that's right.
And I know I've over biked a sprint triathlon before.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
I'm trying to find that spot. Like if I can do 250 watts versus 270, and I
Yeah.
can run better. So I'm trying to, right now I'm trying to find that happy spot.
That's the beauty of doing a weekly event like that. Like
Yeah.
back in the day, I was doing a weekly 5K with our local run club. This was back east. And it's amazing what you can do at that point is you can try different pacing strategies. And I remember saying, okay, this week I'm going to start out slow and I'm going to, descend my pace, or next week I'm going to do an even pace, or so forth. And so it's really great to be able to experiment with those different pacing strategies to figure out what is your best way to complete the entire race as opposed to one segment or even one portion of a segment. So that's great.
It's really good. And I think it's 6 weeks long,
Yeah.
and they do it 3 times a year. So this is
Okay.
like season 3, race 1.
Okay.
But because it's the same thing all the time, well, like next week is 30 minutes and a 20-minute run.
Okay.
They're going to alter back and forth.
Got it.
35.
And we got a tri-club team, huh?
Yeah, in the Las Vegas Tri Club, we got a team. We got 3 people that did it last week. You need 3 people minimum, so I'm glad
Okay.
we got our 3. But everyone's welcome. Anyone in the Tri Club can jump in. I don't care if we win, lose, or whatever. It doesn't matter anymore. It's a community.
So if 5 people do it, then they take the top 3.
They
of
take
the-
the average out of the 5, and then I think that they may throw out the top and the bottom if it's over 3. So
Oh,
there's,
okay. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
but once again,
Cool.
this is for training.
Yeah.
It's,
Yeah. Right. Right.
And yeah, this other thing. I think this is the 5th or 6th time I've done it. I think they've done it 7 times so far. I've missed a
Okay.
couple. But it also provides, like, Wednesday. It's a Wednesday night. It's like hump day. An extra impetus for
Yeah.
getting after it, basically. So yeah,
Oh, that's great.
it's super fun. I encourage people to give it a try. And if you want to sign up, they can go through our Facebook page. I put all the information on how you sign up. It's a lot of steps, unfortunately, because the WTRL, which is, I can't remember what it is, but that's the company that runs the leagues. They're affiliated with Zwift.
Okay.
They're not owned by, it's a different company.
Mm.
It's a really weird thing. They're
Well,
the ones that run the Zwift Racing League and the World Time Trial League, and it's like the highest level league in Zwift.
okay. Well, maybe we can talk with someone at Zwift about this. So
Yeah, let's talk with them next week. Someone at Zwift.
let's do it. So
Yeah.
we've got a guest from Zwift, and I don't know if people want to guess who that is, that we'll have on next week. So that'll be fun.
Yeah, exactly.
All right,
And
but
then
here's.
go ahead.
I was just going to say, but here's the deal. That's working on the bike run transition, which is not what we're going to talk about tonight.
But one other thing we had to talk about, and another reason I'm actually having a good day, is it doesn't happen very often that Zwift opens a new world.
Oh, okay.
Zwift
Nice.
opened a new world. Actually, it was yesterday afternoon, but I didn't get to ride it till today.
Yeah.
So it's Zwift Scotland.
Oh, nice.
And so I got to bounce around Scotland this afternoon, which was super nice.
Yeah.
I think this is their 7th or 8th world, and it's
Okay.
just, it doesn't happen very often. So I was like, I was
Yeah.
all excited to ride the new world today.
That's great.
That's kind of fun. It's the little things, right?
Yeah. Anything that, help keep you motivated to exercise and ride or have you,
Yep.
because boy, it sure has felt like winter this year here.
You want to know something really interesting? So I'm getting on this ride today to do the new world, and there was like 500 people on it.
Yeah.
And every single person is complaining about the weather because it's been so cold everywhere else in the country and
Yeah.
in America. And everyone's like, oh, it's -40 in Duluth and this. I'm like, oh man, I'm so soft. I'm riding inside and it's like 55 degrees outside.
I know. But it's a cold 55.
It is a cold 55, but I still could do it. I could go outside, but yeah.
Oh, it's terrible.
But there's no
Right.
new world outside. It's the same world of Summerlin.
I love it. Yeah, no, I'm the same way. I have totally gone soft on weather, but it is.
I think I've set my record for not riding outside for a full calendar month.
Oh yeah,
I've not ridden outside the entire month of January. I didn't ride outside,
yeah.
and I'm just like, oh my gosh, I am so soft.
Well, speaking of that, I mean, we got to get down to the lake at some point and do a swim and then a bike. And boy, that water's cold down there right now. But that's what we're going to talk about tonight, is a real critical part of triathlon, getting out of the water and getting on your bike. And I know there's a lot of research on biking to running transition, T2. There's not as much research on swim to bike transition.
Well, and not even just research, but if you think about it, people doing training.
Yeah.
Like, how many people do you know that do brick runs, right? They run up, they go for their bike ride, and then they run.
Right.
Very few people do swim, then get on their bike.
That's right.
And I know that there's groups that do this where they set their trainers up literally right beside the bike or right beside
Hmm.
the pool,
Yeah.
and they come right out and they get on and they hammer it.
Yeah.
And I kind of wish that, that was more easily accessible for
Right.
people.
Hmm.
Um, it's just, it's not that, I guess it could be, you have to bring your bike and put it in your car, and still not
Hmm.
the same like intensity, right? Because
No,
a lot of this is actually the intensity that it occurs during the transition
that's right.
that, it's very hard to mimic unless you have your bike literally on the pool deck.
Well, and even going down to Lake Mead, our area,
Oh, yeah, it's a
that's
long way.
that's really still difficult because of how low the water is now at Lake Mead. And you get out of the water, you have to walk up to your car, and then if you're leaving your car where you parked it, it's on the dirt. So now you got to walk your bike up to the pavement, and that sort of negates this whole issue of swim to bike.
Yeah, it's probably a 15-minute T1.
Yeah, yeah, right, right, right.
Do they
So
let you do this at Multigen? Would they let you put a trainer on the
I don't
on
know.
the pool deck?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. They're pretty flexible, so I would imagine they'd be open to it. So they let
Yeah.
people put their bikes on deck.
Oh, they do.
Yeah, you know.
Our pool, they banned us for doing that after
Uh,
after 11 years.
yeah,
Some like a new manager came in. Oh, we can't have bikes on the pool deck. I'm
that's
like,
right. That's right.
these are expensive bikes. We're not leaving them outside. And so
No.
now you know what everyone does? They drive.
Yeah, right, right. Oh, that's frustrating. All right, so swim to bike. So
Yes.
it is amazing how I approach swim training often, not necessarily to get faster in the water. Of course, that helps, but more so just to get ready for the bike and the
Yep.
run. And so we reviewed a paper for this topic. I put it in the comments here for the live stream.
It's
So
a it's a deep paper.
it is a deep paper, yeah. So it's got a lot of physiology in there, a lot of terms, and they've got some biomechanics as well. But it's definitely heavy in physiology.
Yeah. So it's the interlink among physiologic and biomechanical. Oh no, sorry, that's not even. Sorry, that's just one of the sections. It's the interlink between physiologic and biomechanical changes in the swim to cycle transition in triathlon events and narrative review.
Yeah.
That's a mouthful, John.
It is, and I saw it, and it sort of caught my eye, and I said, "Oh, this looks like something perfect," because, like you said, we don't focus a lot in our training on swim to bike transition. A lot of our training, we talk about doing those brick runs, so biking and running, but not so much about swimming and then biking. What did you take from this paper, maybe as a key?
Well, my key thing to take from this is that how much the swim influences
Yeah.
the bike, not necessarily what goes on in T1,
Mm-hmm.
but like how much what we do in the water
Mm-hmm.
ultimately affects it. And the differences, in sprint racing versus long distance racing, because basically one of the conclusions was is that in sprint racing it makes more of a difference what you do in the water compared to long distance racing.
Yeah.
And I
Mm-hmm.
would have thought it would be the opposite. Um, that was one of the bigger conclusions that I came
Well,
from
and
this.
and I think that's actually a great read on the papers because you're spot on. I've been talking about transition T1, but that's not what this paper was about. It wasn't about transition, the time between exiting the water and starting the bike. It was on what happens during the swim portion and how that could eventually influence the bike and or run, which is an interesting take because we know if we look at the times in a triathlon, the swim portion is a small portion of the entire race time. And so on one hand, you look at the swim and you say, well, maybe it's not that important. But in reality, what this paper really came back with, and it was a review of a lot of other work, it was basically coming to the conclusion that what happens in the swim is important for both the bike and the run and subsequent triathlon performance.
The one other thing, and it goes along with what you're saying here completely, is, and the thing, another big takeaway for me, and this is something I've always believed, is that over swimming
Hmm.
has such a deleterious effect on the bike
Right, right. During the race. That's right.
during
Right.
the race. And so many many times I found myself like kind of on the edge when I'm swimming. Like I would say, as far as a time trial, if it was a 30, let's say it's
Mm-hmm.
a half Ironman, like a 32-minute time trial, I'm at like 98%,
Right.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And but they were seeing that if you were at more at 90%,
Yeah.
it wouldn't affect the bike.
Right.
Right? But if you're at 98% or to 100% or even
Mm-hmm.
102%,
Mm-hmm.
it definitely had a more of a negative influence on the bike.
Yeah.
And looking back at my racing, I've almost always had the best bike splits.
Mm-hmm.
Number one, when I've drafted.
Mm-hmm.
Drafted, I swim easier because I
Drafted
often,
did swim. Right. Right.
because I'm often like drafting off someone that's basically the same swimming speed as I am.
Mm-hmm.
Then I can get behind them. I think the numbers they used were like 17 to 21% more efficient if you're
Mm-hmm.
4%,
Mm-hmm.
I think was a
Yeah.
number, more efficient if you're drafting. So for me, like this reiterates how important it is that I draft,
Yeah.
right? Because if I can get to the finish at the exact same time but use less energy, and because I use less energy, I'm at like 80% effort compared to 95% effort. The cycling is going to be so much better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we're talking drafting on the swim, not drafting on a
Drafting on the
bike.
swim,
I mean, there's
exactly.
legal drafting on a bike, but this is the focus on the swim part. No, that's a great point.
And if I can't draft, it's better for me to go 90%
Mm-hmm.
effort swimming than it is 98%.
Yeah.
And
Well.
I find that a lot of people I've talked to and worked with, they don't really recognize this and they swim as hard as they can.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the other one was swimming as hard as you can during that last 200 meters.
Yeah. Right. Right.
Right? And I think that can be very deleterious
Yeah.
to negative to your bike.
Right. No, I love it. And I like that. One of the things I liked about this paper along the same line of thought is the tactics of being really important in the swim, especially for, races where there's drafting allowed on the bike.
Oh yeah,
That
different tactics. Yeah.
that's right. You've got to tactically, if you're doing this is most likely more appropriate for the pros who are all starting at the same time, or if you do an open start, which is there's very few races like that, to get the benefit of getting in that first group on the swim to benefit from the drafting that you're talking about is so critical to begin being able to get out of the water with that first group and then get into that draft pack on that first group so you don't have to catch up on the bike. So that was really an important point.
Yeah, yeah. And in that case, obviously, it's worth the extra effort and worth
Yeah, yeah.
that to
Hmm.
get there, because if not, the race is over.
Yeah, yeah. Or not to lose touch with that first pack. Because if you get in that first pack, you can still draft along with them. So you're right. It's that initial effort to get in that first group and then try to stay in that first group. Hopefully, it's not as hard once you're in it, but it's still you got to be in that group to begin with.
But for us and most age group triathletes, this is not a thing.
Yeah, right. That's
And
right.
one of the mistakes that we've actually talked about this before is going too hard in the beginning of the swim.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That first 200 when your adrenaline's going and you're
Yeah.
nervous and you do that first 200 and you're over 100% of your
Yeah.
pace you want to be at,
Mm-hmm.
and then you struggle around for the rest.
Yeah.
And I've made a conscious effort in the last, I don't know, 3 or 4 years of racing to consciously go easy in that first 200 in a longer distance race. Like in a
Yeah.
sprint race, it is what it is. I go pretty hard the entire time. But if I'm doing a half Ironman, I have to be very conscious of that first 200 to
Yeah.
not go crazy.
Yeah, no, that's right. Especially like you said, half Ironman distance swims. That first 200 meters is your warm up, and you got to treat it like a warm up. And gone are the days where people are giving advice. You got to go out hard, because a lot of times, back in the day, I mean, people were saying, you got to go hard out in the swim, but that was when there was, a mass start,
Right.
and there was a lot of thrashing going on and you had to sort of figure out where to get out of that group to be able to get some clean water. But no, not any longer. I mean that first 200 meters, first 200 yards, you really need to treat as a warm up. A sprint race, you got to do things a little different. Do a warm up ahead of time because 200 meters, your swim leg's almost done.
Yeah. Yeah. And most of the sprint races I do, and like you just said it, there actually is a warm up.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Whereas our long distance racing, a lot of times, even though Ironman keeps talking about swim safe and
Yeah, yeah,
they there's just no opportunity for it. It's
no,
very
that's right.
rare to find a long distance
Hmm.
race
Hmm.
with warm up. Now, Oceanside has a warm up, so
Yeah,
our next race has a warm up. But I'm usually so cold and the ocean's so rough, I don't want to get in.
I know. That's right.
It
And then
looks
get back,
scary.
then get back in line. And so,
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, treat that first part of the swim as your warm up. Okay, so what I also liked about this paper, and you already mentioned this, is that it was talking about the physiological changes that happen during the swim. And one of the key things with swims, especially the longer swims, like the half, or a full, where you're in the water for 30 minutes, an hour, maybe hour and a half or longer, and you're horizontal,
yeah,
and then you're in horizontal position for a long period of time, and you're using your upper body to really move yourself forward, and then you get out of the water and you go vertical, and that's not easy, and there's a lot of changes that happen in the water simply because you're horizontal. And there's a term, and I asked you about it ahead of time. I had not heard this term, sports anemia,
yeah.
and you were familiar with this. So you want to talk about what sports anemia is?
Yeah, and it really doesn't have a tremendous a lot to do with swimming, but sports anemia, and it's also known as pseudoanemia, is what happens when you train a lot, especially in the hot weather. Your body produces more plasma. So
Mhm.
basically, more water. You hold on to more water in your blood. And so what happens is when we take a blood sample, so you take a blood sample and we're going to measure your red blood cell count. When we measure red blood cell count, it's the number of red blood cells per deciliter.
Mm.
So if you have got more water in your blood, it appears as though you have less red blood cells.
Mhm.
You have the same amount of red blood cells that you probably should have. You just have more. The percentage is just off because now you have
Mhm.
more water in your system. Now, the interesting thing about pseudoanemia is if you don't exercise and you stay cold, you don't go outside or whatever, this can be reversed in like 3 or 4 days.
Yeah.
It's actually an interesting phenomenon. And what actually happens, this is a really, and I bet a lot of triathletes have actually had this happen, they don't know why, is if you don't exercise for 2 or 3 days, especially in the summer, it's about day 2, you'll start peeing a lot.
Mm.
And what's happening is your body is saying, I don't need to hold on to this extra water anymore.
Mhm.
Like, because it's holding on to it to keep you for thermal regulation.
Mhm.
Right. So then your blood plasma volume will actually drop. As long as you keep training regularly, it stays high. And once again, the more you train in the heat, the higher it goes.
Mhm.
But you don't have the same you don't get more red blood cells.
Mm.
So as a percentage, it looks like you're anemic. So if you get your blood tested, for example, in the summer in Las Vegas and you're a triathlete, oftentimes it'll come up and they'll say, oh, low red blood cell count. And it's not a real thing. It's
Mm.
a high level of plasma,
Interesting.
not a low level of red blood cells.
Oh, I love it. Oh, that's super helpful. So in this paper, in the context, I think they got into that term mostly when they started talking about the how volume shifts when you're in the horizontal position. And and we all know, we've all experienced where we're lying down or sitting down on the couch and then we stand up quickly and that blood shifts again and shifts away from the head, which is not good. And that's where you get that dizziness feeling. Well, that's what's you're in essence shifting the volume of the blood within the body while you're horizontal in the water for a long period of time. And in the water, which is also compressing the body as well. It is pushing against the body. That's going to change that shift in fluids.
Well, and what does happen, so by the way, that term is called orthostatic hypotension when you stand
Mhm.
up like that.
Oh,
It's an interesting phenomenon in the water, especially in long course if it's relatively warm. And they did mention this, is you sweat actually a lot and you don't even
yeah.
realize it.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be warm water or it could be warmish water and you're wearing a wetsuit. So if we're on the higher end of the spectrum,
Mm-hmm.
if you're in there for, think about this, you're exercising in an Ironman, the average swim time is 120. I think when
Mm-hmm.
last time I looked at it. So you're exercising at a pretty high level and you're sweating for an hour and 20 minutes
Right.
without replenishing water.
Mm-hmm.
And so ultimately what happens is we actually get dehydrated in that state and you don't necessarily recognize it. and so that actually has an effect on the bike,
Hmm.
right? Because you get onto the bike dehydrated, and
Yeah.
a lot of triathletes, especially long course triathletes with race start times at 6 a.m. or
Yeah.
6:30 a.m., they wake up dehydrated. They try and get hydrated, but it's hard because they don't
Hmm.
want to have a full stomach getting into the water. And so this it's a cascading problem that ultimately exacerbates itself on the bike.
Hmm. Oh, I love that. And that's that's part of this issue of being in the water for a long period of time. Like you said, the average time is 120, 150, whatever it is. I mean, that's a long time to be exercising to begin with, but then doing it at that intensity is hard. And they did talk about that intensity factor, which you touched on already, and that how that intensity during the swim can really have a cascading negative effect on the bike.
One the other thing I'd like to add, John, is when we talk about intensity in the swim, oftentimes there's a misnomer that someone that swims a 140 Ironman
Hmm.
not putting as much effort as someone swimming in 1 hour Ironman. I disagree.
Mm.
I think they're less efficient of a swimmer.
Yeah,
They're potentially are burning more calories, are going to be potentially hotter because they're inefficient in their movements and potentially losing more water.
yeah, yeah.
And think about that, like you're an hour 40 of exercising. At no other point would you do an hour 40 exercising and not drink.
Hmm. No, that's right. And they actually talked about core temperature changes as well, and how that is a factor in swimming in general. And it was sort of neat because we've done some work in this space where we've looked at core temperature and swimming in wetsuit in warm water, warm being 78, 80 degrees Fahrenheit, which tends to be right on that warmer end of the spectrum for a wetsuit. And they talked about how even a change of just under a degree Celsius was actually a pretty big change in core temperature.
It was interesting. When I read that, I kind of was like, this doesn't seem like a big deal to me because
Hmm.
I've done a lot of work with core temperature as well. And if I get on the bike, even indoor, my core temperature within 20 minutes is up 1 or 2 degrees
Hmm.
Celsius.
Hmm. Yeah.
And so to me, that was not a big deal if you're trained.
Hmm.
We're trained that we're going to be able to exercise at higher levels. Like even in a half Ironman, I'm around 102
Hmm.
for a lot of the bike and a lot of the run. And if as long as you're trained and able to handle that and you have good blood plasma volume, you,
Hmm.
you can handle those higher temperatures. But I think that when it gets higher than that, like when you start to literally sweat more and more, and you're on the higher end, I think you're right with like when we're close to that edge of like the 76 degrees and wearing a wetsuit,
Hmm.
I think that can become more of an issue. And we've talked about this before, and I know you've done some research and reading into this area. Like actual heat stroke in a triathlon is in the swim is very, very
Hmm.
difficult
Yeah, right, right.
to come
No, the
to.
water has to be pretty warm. And see, and that's what's interesting is that um, the study we did, we had them swim in a pool without a wetsuit, and they did 1,000 meter swim, and their core temp went up about 8 tenths of a Celsius degree of Celsius. Then we put them in a wetsuit and have them swim that 1,000 meter swim, and the core temperature changed about the same. Now, what's interesting is they swam faster in the wetsuit, which makes sense because the wetsuit is going to aid in reducing the drag resistance force. But the core temperature increased, but it only increased the same amount as what we saw with them not wearing a wetsuit. So now you start to go down this path of, well, maybe the person's trying to, swim at a pace that only allows core temperature to go up so much. And I think you're spot on. I think one of the things elite athletes have as an advantage over athletes who aren't elite is that they can tolerate higher core temperatures.
You
Yeah,
can train it.
yeah, right, right. And once you get to a certain level, high core temperature is really super dangerous. But there may be moderate changes in core temperature that you as an athlete need to be able to tolerate in order to have a high performance. Now,
So there was some, it's a little bit of a tangent, but there was some research done. It was in the UCI tour for cycling. I think
mhm,
it was one of the Middle East tours.
yeah.
And they were looking at some of the core temperatures of these elite cyclists, and several of them were above heat stroke level.
Oh, really? Wow.
And like what we consider like traditional heat stroke level is 105
Yeah. Yeah.
and performing fine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like no negative effects.
Mm-hmm.
And that like that's like kind of weird that like you think about it, like they're above heat stroke level,
Mm-hmm.
but no signs of heat stroke. And but basically they have physiologically morphed themselves to be able to tolerate more.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And or they're just have a genetic predisposition to be able to tolerate more, and that's why they're elite athletes.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's interesting. I always say one of the dangers of exercise in the heat is monitoring and managing core temperature,
Yeah.
and you don't want it to go high. And so that's interesting that there are some athletes that can tolerate above safety levels, but core temperature is really that can kill you if it goes up too high. But what's interesting is I've been having another discussion with a colleague over in Norway who does swim temperature work too, and the trend is to look more at skin temperature as something that a person may be regulating or sensing. Core temperature is not easy to change. I know it can change, but it it's core. It takes a lot to actually make it change. But skin temperature can change a lot quicker. And he's been looking at more of what's happening with skin temperature during swimming in different temperatures and lots of fluctuations in skin temperature. And that's a big organ, and it may be something that is really influencing performance because the athlete may be sensing that more so than sensing what's happening at the core level.
So it's super interesting you bring this up. I was literally having a conversation with my wife about this today.
Mhm.
So I was riding on Zwift, and the the heater or a house heater kicked on. I'm like, oh man, that sucks. So
Yeah.
like turn the heat down.
Mhm.
And but when I ride indoors, like
Mhm.
I don't like it's really weird. Unless I'm racing, a fan on me makes me too cold.
Yeah, yeah, right. Very sensitive, right.
And my skin temperature, like I'll get off the bike, I'll ride 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
My skin temperature is in the 80s.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm almost shivering on the
Yeah,
outside, but I'm sweating a ton.
yeah, right.
Right? So I'm feeling cold,
Mm-hmm.
but I know my core temperature is elevated.
Yeah.
And so it's a real, you're right. Like our thermoregulatory system that we feel and that we
Mm-hmm.
sense is the skin temperature.
Yeah.
You don't feel the core temperature. The
Mm-hmm.
core temperature is regulated because you'll sweat, you'll feel the sweat,
Mm-hmm.
but you're right, you don't feel the core temperature.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's a super interesting topic, but if you're wearing a wetsuit, that's one of the things that could influence your swim performance and subsequently what happens on the bike. Because again, that's what this paper is focusing on is if you increase your core temp on the swim, it may influence the bike, but the longer the bike, the less of an impact that core temperature actually has.
And it also said that wearing a wetsuit made you cycle better.
Yeah, yeah, right, right.
So
Well, which makes
might
sense.
raise your core temperature, but you're going to cycle better because you put out less effort.
Well, but again, core temperature, and this is what we showed, it changed the same
Oh,
as
that's
if you were swimming without a wetsuit, but you swam faster with the wetsuit. And so one of the ideas that we put out on in that paper was that, well, maybe that core temperature is what you're really hitting, and that you could have even swam faster in a wetsuit if the water was cooler,
Hmm.
if that makes sense. So you're still, getting the same change in temperature, but you can put more effort in. And I mean, it's obvious that the more we put effort into something, the more heat we're going to generate within the body, and therefore the potential for getting warmer.
What did you think about their comments about kicking and not kicking? And
Oh,
I honestly I got a little lost in that area.
yeah.
I because personally, like I'm trying to train myself right
Yeah,
now. And I did it last fall as well to kick less
yeah, yeah, yeah,
because I want to. Well, number one, I'm a notoriously cramped swimming, and I think it's because I
yeah,
overkick.
yeah.
And so I'm literally it, everyone I swim with thinks I'm doing something crazy because I almost exclusively swim now with fins on.
Yeah, Yeah.
I'm trying to train myself to hold my position and not
Hmm.
overkick. And when you wear fins, you can't overkick when you're swimming.
Right. Right.
And I know like everyone I swim with like, oh, Ted's cheating all the time.
Yeah. Right.
I'm
Right.
not cheating all the time. I'm trying to
You're,
fix a problem
yeah. Yeah.
and not cramp when I get to a race.
Hmm.
And I don't care what I look like in the pool. I really don't.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
I couldn't understand where they were going with this. Did you pick that up?
Yeah, so what I took from the read was they're talking about the plasma shift, and when you get out of the water, and if you don't have, if all the plasma, all the volume is in essence shifted to your upper body, not all, but you know what I mean, where you start getting more fluid within the trunk area, then you get up and you start running, and that would be a negative influence ultimately when you get to the bike. And so what they started talking about was, well, start using the leg muscles to draw some of that blood towards the working muscles or eventual working muscles for the bike. But I thought that was a bit of a stretch. I think anecdotally, that would be uh, that could actually cause more of a negative effect, that you're trying to kick more in the swim, which is not easy, you know, especially if you're, you know, depending on your swim stroke style, if you're a 2 beat kicker or 6 beat kicker, you don't really want to be changing your kick rhythm at that time coming in near the finish. And so I didn't agree with how they wrote it, but I do agree that it's good to do some kicking and not just let your legs just sort of hang back the whole
I'm
time.
not trying to. Yeah,
Yeah,
I agree too. Like, I'm not trying to hang back. Like,
right, right.
I'm trying to have a compact kick
Yep, yeah,
instead of a big kick that is
yeah,
not very hydrodynamic
yeah.
and is very forceful.
Mm-hmm.
But no, I think you're right. And the interesting thing was in the paper, they were comparing. There was, remember, this is a review of other papers.
Mm-hmm.
They were comparing swimming with your arms only,
Yeah, yeah,
swimming with your full body, and swimming with your legs only.
yeah, yeah.
Like, well, first of all, no one's swimming with their legs only in a triathlon.
Sorry.
I can tell you, I've never seen somebody just kick the entire
Yeah,
way.
yeah,
So to me, that seemed like a moot point. It was all I
right.
want to know is like the difference between swimming with your legs or with your arms only and like a complete swim.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I think what I took from that section was, you know, you really want to use the legs some, but I disagreed with them talking about kicking more near the end. And I think you just got to maintain your stroke and keep you know, a healthy kick. You know, I'm an advocate of a 2 beat kick for these distance swims, but it's hard to change your kick rhythm, and 2 beat, you know, being how many kicks you have per stroke. Um, so I think the takeaway is probably use your legs so that you draw some blood towards those muscles, versus don't use your legs and don't just let them hang out behind you and let that blood be shunted to another part of the body.
You know, it's interesting too because if you do go hard at the end, you're basically increasing your your aerobic need, right?
Mm-hmm.
VO2 is going to go up,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that that's another issue. Like if I get out of the water and I'm breathless,
Right.
like that's not a good way to go into T1. Like
Mm-hmm.
I need to actually have my wits about me.
Yeah.
And
Right.
you know, there's a lot of there's a lot of thought that needs to happen in T1. There's a
Mm-hmm.
lot going
That's
on.
true.
I mean, how many times have you missed your bike
Or lost a sock.
or lost a sock or whatever? And so I do think that having yourself be a little bit more calm
Mm-hmm.
going into T1 rather than being you know, kind of on the edge
Yeah.
as far as like oxygen delivery and glycogen delivery to the brain is for the average person maybe better. Now maybe it's because I don't, you know, I'm not a pro and have everything like in the first slot
Mm-hmm.
and a nice box and all set up. You know, we get here's a bag, right?
Right.
Here's your bag, just
Yeah.
deal with it.
Yeah.
And
Right. Right.
there's a lot, I think there's a lot more thought that goes in. Honestly, there's a lot more thought that goes into an age grouper's T1 than a
Mm-hmm.
pro triathlete's T1. And a lot of this research was done with pro
Yeah.
triathletes.
No, I think you're right. And I think this is why that last 200 meters, you're not thinking of kicking hard, because in that last 200 meters, you're really starting to prep for what decisions you need to make when you exit the water.
Yeah.
And a lot of times I may be swimming close to someone near the finish of the swim, I don't care if I get them, in front of them or they get in front of me, because at that point, in that last 200 meters, I am really focusing on what am I going to do once I exit the water. I start making the decision, when am I going to take my wetsuit off? When am I going to take my cap and goggles off as I run to the bike? And then what am I going to do once I get to that transition area? So that last 200 meters is, for me, is much more focused on what's the next part of the race versus I want to be the first one out of the water, or I want to beat this person out of the water. I don't do that at all.
In pro racing, that's so important, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Like if you come out with that front pack,
That's right.
if you're in a little group and there's two guys that kind of break away that last 200 meters, you may have to go.
That's right.
Right? Because the race will be up the road on you. But in our situation, that's in the typical age group situation, that's not going to happen.
No, for sure. Yeah, you're right. And the pros, different conversation. And that was part of what they talked about in here too, is that the level of athlete really made a difference in terms of what's happening in the swim versus what's happening in the swim, and how that could influence what's going to happen on the bike. And you're spot on. I mean, if you're a top pro, you need to be in that first group of swimmers to be able to get on that bike and be in that first group. Even if it's a non-drafting race, we all know that even drafting legally, you still get a benefit. And so if you miss that first group, you're already in jeopardy of not winning a race.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. So did you have any other takeaways?
Let me see. Let me look at my notes here. Physiological. They had some biomechanics stuff, and they were talking about stroke rate during swimming with and without a wetsuit. I don't think people have to think too much about what's happening with stroke rate, but when you do put a wetsuit on, it can change how you're going to swim. And this is why I actually really like what you're doing with wearing even the buoyancy shorts during swimming, is because you're learning what that stroke is like. If you don't swim enough in your wetsuit, you're going to put it on, and all of a sudden your rotation is going to be a little different. Your legs are going to be in a different position, which is going to cause your arms to do something different. And if you don't have that all worked out, that race day in a wetsuit can be that much harder. You may still go faster in a wetsuit, but not as fast as you probably could.
It's interesting because, one of the people that we've interviewed before, Rick Simpson, age group world champion, posted, it was over Christmas time, he posted that he was swimming in his wetsuit. And the benefits of swimming in his wetsuit. And I completely agree with that.
In the pool.
In the pool. For me this year, I can tell you my 4 races I got planned are all going to be wetsuit swims. No doubt.
You got to practice that too.
And the other races that I'm going to probably do, I don't care about. But the ones I actually care about are all going to be wetsuit races. So I need to prepare myself, even now where I'm still 2 months away from my next race, to be in that position. So I think that's good. So the one question I had for you, and it made me think in this paper, and then I've heard this from some triathlon coaches where they have their athletes regularly get out of the water and like do something. So they'll do like, let's say 4 100s, then get out of the water as quick as they can, and then do 10 push-ups and then get back in the water. So I'm wondering if the idea is they're trying to train that position change.
I don't know if that is the case, but that certainly makes sense. And it also makes sense that there are a number of Ironman races which are 2-loop swim, and you have to get out. And I'll tell you, back years ago here at the Multigen, we used to have those splash and dash races where you'd have to swim, then you'd run even just 2 miles, and then you'd swim again. And that second swim after running it's horrendous. It's terrible. So training that a little bit, there may be some advantages to that.
But like I said, I don't know if it's trainable. I mean, this would be a good little research study to see, is it actually trainable to get used to that position change? Okay, and it might be trainable, but could you do it enough? Like, would it have to be every swim session? You've got to get out several times.
Now this is a great question. I hadn't thought about it ahead of time, but I do think that doing those splash and dashes, that very first one you do, that second swim was really hard. But once you do it, then you learn a little bit, And I think what you're learning is because it's a fluid shift. You're running, so your blood is drawn to your lower extremity. Then you're jumping in the water, and now you're using your upper body. And so I think there is probably a technique or at least a learning of how to transition from that where the blood is ending the run to starting to swim.
Interesting. Yeah.
So,
And I said, I don't know the answer if it's trainable,
yeah. Hmm.
but anyway, I'm not going to be the guy on Tuesday night swim group that jumps out and does 10 push-ups
Yeah,
and
yeah.
because you know
We
they're
used to
already.
do that in swim
Plus, I've
team.
got my fins on, so it's going to be even harder.
No, we used to do that in swim team, get out and do sit-ups and push-ups, whatever, and then jump back and start swimming. And that's not easy. That is not easy at all. So you know what's interesting about this paper though, and got me thinking, I've been thinking about this for a while. I've had issues of nausea in iron distance races. And one of the issues that I've been thinking is a contributive factor is I'm so horizontal for, an hour, and then I go to the bike that I haven't trained that enough. And that change of blood flow or change in fluid, I don't know if that's contributed to that nauseous feeling that I end up getting on the bike ride, because it obviously has something to do with the gut in terms of the nausea, but whether or not this fluid shift is an issue, I'm not sure.
It could be because once again, like I don't know. I know you swim often, but is it a regular thing for you to swim and then go for a relatively hard bike ride?
No, no, and that's what I've been trying to start doing more of, is it trying to work that in, especially as a race comes up, is I was going down to the lake and doing a longer swim and then trying to get on the bike right away as quick as you can within, Lake Mead confines. So,
But I wonder if you could do this at your pool. Does your
yeah,
pool have some stationary bikes or anything?
yeah, yeah.
Just
That
get on
was,
stationary bike for like 10 minutes.
mm-hmm, right, right.
And I don't know. Like I honestly don't know the answer.
Yeah, I know a lot of people coaches talk about when to start taking fluids and or solid food after the swim. And the advice I see a lot is wait 20 miles. And I think that advice is probably built around this type of paper, is
Mhm.
that it has to do with that change of volume and where the blood's being shunted.
But 20 is 20 miles or 20 minutes.
I've read 20 miles, which is,
Well,
an hour or
if I'm
so.
sprint racing,
Yeah. No, no, this is iron distance.
I know, I'm just
Yeah.
saying, or even an Olympic distance, the race is
No, no,
over.
no, no, this was for Ironman events.
Okay.
Is not getting too quick into the fluids and or definitely not the solids. Fluids probably yes, more so, but not solid.
Well, and I think temperature would play a role too, right?
Yeah.
If you're somewhere hot and humid, let's say racing in Cozumel or something like that, where you're going to be fighting the dehydration all day,
Mm-hmm.
I think that it would be different than you're racing somewhere cold.
Mm-hmm.
I think it might be a different. I don't know. It's kind of the lesser of two evils here, right?
So I know you coach a lot of people.
Mhm.
I don't know if that a lot of people know this, but I'll bring it up now. After reading this paper, have you thought about how you would talk with any of your athletes about the swim to bike?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because the message is, but this is a message I've always given the people that I work with, is to take the swim easier than you think,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
especially in half Ironmans and Ironmans.
Yeah.
So that it was kind of like just confirmation, or maybe it's confirmation bias in some ways, because once again I find that too many people go too hard in that first half or the beginning of the swim,
Mhm.
whether it's nervous energy or whatever that is. So just to be very deliberate in that. The other thing that I've talked to some of the people that I work with, especially ones that are a little bit better swimmers, is going to a 2 beat kick.
Mm.
Right? Some people don't have the ability. Like
Mhm.
if you're not a good swimmer to begin with, and you're just trying to figure it out, and you're a naturally have a 6 beat kick, I'm not gonna like mess with you yet.
Right.
But it's something that I've developed over the years myself personally, is a 2 beat kick for racing,
Yeah.
especially long course racing, going for a 2 beat kick. And I can 6 beat kick too.
Mhm.
But I found that 2 beat is better. I don't get nearly as winded.
Yeah.
The other thing, and I'm a huge proponent of it, and I know we started off talking about it, is the importance of the draft. And with everybody that I've coached, we talk about before the race, like the last kind of conversation we have is figuring out how you can get in a draft.
Mm-hmm.
And if this is not magic, and we've talked about it before. If you're swimming along and you're going the exact same speed as somebody else, you keep breathing to the right, and they're there, and they're there, and they're there. After 100, just get in behind them.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're going the exact same speed, you're going to end at the same time anyways.
Yeah,
You
right.
save 20% of your energy,
Mm-hmm.
and it's going to feel too easy. And if your swim feels easy, like you're going too easy, you're going the right pace,
Yeah.
right?
I love
And
it.
the rest of the day is so much better.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, John, like you're a good swimmer, but you gotta, I'm sure that you're in the same boat. Like when you've gotten a good draft for like a long, like a
Mm-hmm.
half hour of a
Yeah.
race, you get out on the bike and you just feel better.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
would you agree?
Oh yeah, no, drafting on the swim is the right thing. It's yeah, I think the one race that really sticks out to me was doing Kona, where you know I'm an hour swimmer, which on one hand can be really good, but at Kona it's like everybody's an hour swimmer, and so then it was a mass start, and I was with people the whole time, and it was really it was quite a different experience than a lot of races where a lot of times the hour swimmers will sort of break away, and there's not necessarily a lot, but it's but yeah, no, if you can make the swim easier, uh, that's going to make the rest of the day easier. And I do remember, I think this is where I started, when I got back into triathlon in 2007-ish, whatever it was. I remember going down and doing a race, and I got out of the water, and I was actually quite surprised at how much the swim took out of me, and that had a negative effect going into the bike, and then had a negative effect going into the run. And I said, okay, at this point, I really need to get trained to swim again, just to be able to bike better and to be able to run better.
No, and I think like a lot of triathletes, I hate to always say that, but they overemphasize how fast you can swim
Yeah, right, right.
rather than how long you can swim.
Mm-hmm.
Like durability of swimming is way, way, way more important. Like
Mm-hmm.
I,
Mm-hmm.
I hate to say it, but I could almost care less what your 100 time is.
Mm-hmm.
I want to know what your 1,000 time is, right?
Yeah, right, right.
Because if you do hundreds and rest, hundreds and rest, hundreds and rest, that's not triathlon.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the things that I instituted, and people I coach is on the weekends we tend to do longer
Mm-hmm.
workouts.
Yeah.
Like I'm doing this thing for myself, and I haven't brought it to a lot of people I'm coaching yet. Is on Saturday swim, my first thing is a half hour swim,
Mm-hmm.
cold,
Yeah.
right? Because that's reality of what I'm going to
That's
do
it.
in an Ironman, and I want to feel what that first 100 feels like cold,
Yeah.
at 200 what I feel like, and at 300, and I'm not pushing.
Find that pace.
I'm
Mm-hmm.
finding the pace, and I'm finding how long it takes my body to warm up to the point where I can, okay, now I can hold.
Yeah.
And if I can do it in training, I should be able to do it in the race. Now, I understand there's times we need to do intervals, and I like to do some sprint interval stuff too, because I think it helps with your swim efficiency, and I think
Mm-hmm.
swim efficiency is super, super, super important. But I still find that volume is more important than intensity in swimming, in triathlon, because
Mm-hmm.
of the fact that I need to bike afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but
Yeah, no, I love it. And, I remember a coach telling me at one point that he will only take athletes when they've reached 10,000 meters a week swimming, at least. And because up until that point, they're not doing enough swimming for him to be able to help the athlete. And he said, you need to have at least this base volume, and then we can do some work. Not everyone needs to do that, but that was just his perspective. And I think speaking to the point that you're making is that having some swim frequency and having some swim volume is good to have. And then that is going to help ultimately your bike and your run. But when you were talking about that, that actually made me think about another thing on this paper, which I really liked, is they identified one of the challenges with the research in this area of swim to bike is a lot of the research is done in the pool. And so now you're going right from the pool and you're transitioning right to the bike, which is probably a fixed cycle at that point. And that's different than when you exit the water, you run whatever on the beach, on the gravel, on whatever it is, and get to your bike and then bike. So there is a limitation of the research. And so, a lot of times when we read papers like, that are covered in this paper, we really need to be careful about how we apply some of the information because it may be in such a controlled environment that it doesn't necessarily apply. I think to the way that some of the races down at Lake Mead are right now, with the lake being so low, it's really a swim, then a run, then a bike, and then a run. And then this discussion of swim to cycle ends up changing because you've got that run in between, and so now you've really got to prepare for that run as opposed to the bike. So it is always interesting anytime you look at papers. A lot of times you want to control a lot of things in an experiment, but sometimes the more you control, the less generalizable the data are.
Well, and they did make mention of some of the research being in pools and in 25-meter pools and 50-meter pools.
Mm-hmm.
And same thing, like if you're doing this research, especially in a 25-meter pool,
Yeah.
where you get a flip turn or you get a turn every time, that's not the same.
Yeah. Right.
You turn and you rest.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody knows this. If you swam long course and short course, long course is harder.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. And the thing is, that's only 50 meters.
Yeah.
Like,
right.
in an Ironman, that's half a buoy.
No. Right.
Then you get a little rest.
Mm-hmm.
You're not resting. Well, some people rest and
Yeah.
that's okay. But you're not resting every 50.
Yeah.
And you're definitely not resting every 25.
Yeah. No, you're spot on. And in fact, we actually pointed that out as a weakness of one of our papers where we looked at core temperature, doing it in the pool. Because if you're wearing a wetsuit in the pool and you push off the edge, there's a tendency for water to get inside the wetsuit, which is cooler. And now you've got to reheat that. So we actually said we need to redo this study outside in open water or in a flume where there's no chance of pushing off, because you're pushing off at a real high velocity and that wetsuit can let water in.
I think the flume still might get water down.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So I'll tell you this. This happened just before Christmas break. Our pool heater broke where we swim. And so they sent out a message, hey, the pool's 70, come if you want. I'm like, oh, perfect opportunity to bring my wetsuit. Awesome. I froze.
Yeah.
And it was because we're swimming 25 yards, and every time I pushed off, I got cold water. And so it was my skin temperature once again, right? My core temperature was fine.
Right.
Every time I pushed off, I just got this chill through. I think I made like 2,000. I'm like, I am out. Like I cannot keep going.
Yeah.
If I just stood there and tread water, I would have been warmer.
That's right, because the whole idea of a wetsuit is you get water in, but your body heats it up. And that's that layer of insulation that actually keeps you warm.
Yeah. Oh man. And the other person that was there, that he had a wetsuit on too. Same thing. He had to get out. And the few people that swam without wetsuits, they stayed in.
That's great.
But I think what we were dealing with was this change all the time, right?
Yeah.
When you just, like, my wife, she didn't have a wetsuit on. She swam the entire time, and she was cold.
Yeah.
She wasn't like, I was miserable.
Oh yeah.
Because by like 15 yards or so, I was starting to warm up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm good. Then flip turn. Oh man. So
right,
I was just, so it's a real thing.
Oh, I love it.
So what I started doing was like literally not pushing off.
Yeah. Right. And then it changes everything that you're doing after that. So, that is good. Good stuff.
Good time. That was really good. Thanks for finding that paper. It was really good.
Yeah. So what do you get this weekend?
Swim, run, hike, bike.
Yeah. Hopefully it won't be below 50.
Yeah. I was really hoping to get outside on Sunday, but Sunday's supposed to be windy. And that's usually my long bike day. So I'm like, well, hopefully this will be my last long Sunday bike ride inside.
Yeah. Me too. Hopefully I'll get outside, but like you, if it's cold and it's too windy, I'll opt for the trainer.
Tomorrow's supposed to be nice.
Is it?
Yeah, I suppose tomorrow's supposed to be nice. But tomorrow's my swim run day.
Okay.
And Sunday's my long bike day usually. And so, I mean, I could switch it up and swim, I guess, and go for a ride outside. But
no. Well, I'll have to look at the weather and see which way I'll
They're
go.
so soft.
It's terrible, but that's the beauty of living here is that we can still train year round. We could go outside, but
Oh, I'm gonna run outside tomorrow for sure.
oh, that's good.
Yeah. All right, John. Well, I hope you have a great weekend.
All right, thanks. You too. Thanks, everyone.